Have you ever been tested in silence? Have you ever tried to do the right thing only to be punished for it? Have you ever felt like the more integrity you show, the more doors close on you? There are moments when doing good seems like it's not enough. Moments when your fair choices go unrewarded, ignored. You reach out and get nothing in return. You speak with love and hear contempt in response. Life sometimes seems to administer invisible tests, not with words, but with silence, not with swords, but with waiting. And when you're there, alone, disbelieved, that's when the real question arises. Will you stay true to yourself, even when no one is watching? Or will you become a prisoner of resentment? The world has been applauding those who shout the loudest, those who strike back first, those who retaliate with fury. But what about those who endure in silence? Those who, even when hurt, refuse to hurt in return, who don't bend to circumstances, but stand firm in what they believe. True integrity isn't tested when we're being applauded. It's forged when we're in chains and still choose not to break inside. This isn't about winning arguments or proving a point. It's about staying whole, even when everything around you tries to shatter you. This video isn't just a biblical story. It's a mirror for those trying to stay calm in the storm, a whisper for those seeking wisdom in the noise, a reminder that sometimes the hardest prison is the one no one sees. Stay until the end and discover why this story might change how you deal with your own invisible prisons. If you seek self-mastery, inner silence, and the strength to endure even in abandonment, this channel is your refuge. Today, we'll uncover the Stoic message behind when you're denied. Keep your integrity. The prison of Paul and Silas. Night fell over Philippi like a leaden cloak. The heat of the day still lingered in the stones of the streets, but the air was tense, hostile. People hurried by, restless, as if an invisible unease hung over them. In the midst of this scene, two men walked quietly. Paul and Silas. They weren't there to win applause or seek an audience. Their words weren't weapons, but seeds scattered on dry, hard, often hostile ground. They had come by a calling, by an inner conviction, by a faith that didn't shout but sustained. They freed a young girl possessed by spirits, a slave whose owners exploited her suffering for profit. What should have been cause for celebration became reason for condemnation. There was no jury, no hearing, just angry voices, violent hands, and a system that valued profit over freedom, control over truth. They were dragged into the public square like criminals, accused, humiliated, beaten before the crowd. After the shouts came the chains, thrown into the inner prison, the darkest, the dampest, the most forgotten. Their backs marked by injustice, their feet locked in stocks, as if physical pain alone could break their spirit. In that cell, where most would lose faith, where many would surrender to despair or rage, Paul and Silas did what few would. They chose serenity, not from numbness, but from strength, not from the absence of pain, but the presence of something greater. It was deep night, and in the heart of darkness, a heavy silence filled the air, but not for long. Something that defied all human logic began to happen. No groans, no murmurs were heard. Instead, hymns, soft, profound. Paul and Silas were praying, singing, praising. They didn't beg for release. They didn't ask, why us? They were there whole. While the world tried to break them from the outside, they rebuilt themselves within. Their integrity didn't depend on physical freedom. It was an inner choice, sacred ground no jailer could enter. Even in chains, they acted as free men. Because, in truth, they were already free from anger, from fear, from ego. And then, at midnight, the earth responded. An earthquake shook the prison's foundations. The doors flew open. The chains broke. Everything was free. Everything except the hearts of the oppressors. The jailer, seeing the doors wide open, panicked. He thought everyone had escaped and, seized by guilt, drew his sword to take his own life. But Paul's voice, steady and calm, stopped him. Don't harm yourself. We are all here. It was as if, even in the moment of physical freedom, they were still mindful of others, of their pain, of what truly mattered. They were free, but they didn't run. And that, perhaps, was the greatest act of freedom, choosing to stay when everyone expects you to flee, choosing to remain true to your values, even when everything screams go. Not out of fear, but for something greater, integrity. The jailer, shaken, no longer knew right from wrong. The lines between good and evil had been turned upside down before his eyes. The men he had locked away, were now his liberators. He fell to his knees, washed their wounds, and asked a question that echoes through centuries. What must I do to be saved? In the darkness of that cell, a light was kindled not from torches or fire, but from within. A light born not of supernatural miracles, but of the quiet resolve of those who refused to bend to circumstance. The real revolution didn't happen in the prison walls, but in the hearts, because someone chose not to react with fury, because someone, even when denied, kept their integrity. And here, Stoic wisdom intertwines with this story, because what Paul and Silas did that night, Marcus Aurelius would call self-mastery. Epictetus would say it wasn't the chains, the accusations, or the beatings that bound or freed them. It was their inner choices, their judgment of events. They understood that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. That injustice can wound you outwardly, but only you can break inwardly. That true power isn't controlling the external world, but ruling your own spirit. This story isn't about escape or divine spectacle. It's about the kind of freedom no one can take. It's about acting with virtue even when everything demands vengeance. It's about the kind of resistance that makes no noise but transforms everything around it. Paul and Silas didn't conquer an army. They didn't write treatises. They didn't seize power. But they changed the lives of those around them simply by refusing to be shaken. Because they were, above all, masters of themselves. And that, perhaps, is the deepest message of all. When life denies you, remain whole. When you're imprisoned, sing. When everything tells you to run, breathe and choose to stay. Not because it's easy, but because that's how the spirit is forged. Virtue doesn't need a stage. It flourishes in the dark and transforms in silence. As Epictetus, one of the greatest Stoic masters, would say, it's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. This isn't just philosophical theory, it's exactly what Paul and Silas lived that dark night. They were beaten, chained, humiliated, yet they refused to let external events define their inner state. The prison didn't disturb them, the silence didn't unbalance them, because their focus wasn't on the present injustice itself, but on what to do with it. They didn't interpret their imprisonment as defeat. They didn't scream, "Why, God?" They didn't ask, "Where is justice?" They turned the cell into an altar, the pain into a ritual, the silence into a hymn. They transformed instinctive reaction into conscious presence. They chose soul discipline over impulsive rage. And this, in Stoicism, is more than self-control, it's virtue in its purest form. Seneca, another pillar of Stoic philosophy, said, "True greatness is bearing calmly what we cannot avoid." Bearing calmly, not out of weakness, but strength. Paul and Silas had no control over the chains, the beatings, or the prison, but they had absolute control over themselves, and that's what made them unbreakable. They didn't seek revenge. They didn't succumb to victimhood. They didn't demand divine retribution. Instead, they cultivated something far rarer, inner justice. The kind that doesn't need an audience, that doesn't shout, that reveals itself in how they treated the jailer, in how they stood firm even as everything crumbled. This is the essence of what the ancient Stoics called erect moral excellence, a virtue that doesn't depend on ideal circumstances, but flourishes precisely when everything is against it. Not the greatness of conquering the world, but of conquering oneself. And here's where Marcus Aurelius' wisdom comes in. The obstacle to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The prison didn't interrupt Paul and Silas' mission. It was the mission. The chains didn't delay their purpose. They revealed it. What seemed like an end was the beginning of a silent transformation, just for them, but for the jailer and the prisoners around them. That cold floor became sacred. Those chains became symbols of resilience. That darkness gave birth to light. They remind us that obstacles aren't dead ends, but invitations to see and live differently, because the real barrier is never outside. It's in how we react. In what we do with what we can't change. This is the beauty of Stoicism. It doesn't call us to control the world. It teaches us to command the only territory that's truly ours, our mind, our character, our response. Paul and Silas' imprisonment wasn't an accident. It was a lesson, a silent manifesto of what the wise have always known. The most powerful freedom is the one no one can take, and the deepest virtue is the one that flourishes in the dark. And you, are you living in your own invisible prison? Maybe there are no physical bars around you, but there are limits holding you captive inside. the weight of rejection. The feeling of being unseen, unheard, of giving your all and still being ignored. Maybe your cell is a home without warmth, where words wound more than heal, or a workplace that takes everything from you, except what matters most, your dignity. Perhaps the chains are in a betrayal that still bleeds in silence, or in a routine that numbs you, a cycle that drains you, an anxiety that silences you, and without realizing it, you stay there, serving time for a sentence you didn't choose, carrying guilt that isn't yours, hiding wounds you've learned to ignore. But what if this silence that troubles you isn't punishment? What if this emptiness you feel is the exact space where your soul is being shaped? What if, like Paul and Silas, you're being to escape, but to awaken? Their story shows us that true freedom doesn't begin when doors open. It begins when you choose not to be defined by pain. When you decide your worth doesn't depend on others' approval. When you realize it's not your environment that shapes you, but your response to it. You may be in the middle of your own dark night, no answers, no light, but you can still choose to sing. Maybe not with your lips, but with your actions, with the peace of someone who has nothing to prove, with the steadiness of someone who knows who they are even when the world denies them, who hurt you, and you still haven't forgiven. Who did you reach out to, only to receive silence in return? Have you been reacting to pain as expected, or responding like someone who's already grown? You don't need an earthquake to leave your prison. Need to reconnect with your integrity. You need to remember, freedom isn't the absence of obstacles. It's the presence of awareness. Maturity is this, not making a scene when you're hurt, not exploding when you're misunderstood. It's taking a deep breath and choosing not to lose yourself. Your greatest strength isn't in the shout, it's in the quiet resolve of someone who knows, I may be going through this, but this isn't going through me. Life may deny you many things, recognition, justice, support, but it can never deny you the choice to stay whole. And maybe that's the invitation right now. Don't run, don't retaliate, don't break, stay, sing, turn the silence into fertile ground for your virtue to grow, because the truest freedom is knowing nothing outside is power over what's been anchored within. Virtue doesn't shout, it doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. It doesn't make noise, doesn't crave applause. It remains steady, even when the ground disappears, constant, even when the world begs for impulsive reactions. The truth is, the wise man doesn't choose the easiest path. He honors the one given to him, even if it leads to a prison, to a silence that feels like punishment, or 2 nights where all he has is his faith as a pillow. Paul and Silas weren't there because they did something wrong. They were where they were because there was something to right in them, something that unsettled that system, something that defied the norm. And maybe that's your case, too. You're not being tested because you're weak. You're being tested because there's something powerful inside you, something that hasn't fully emerged yet. This prison you feel, emotional, spiritual, invisible, might actually be the womb of a new version of you, a stronger one, a more centered one better prepared for what's coming. So, don't despise the days when nothing seems to happen. Don't underestimate the moments when everything feels silent. That's where the soul aligns. That's where virtue learns to walk alone. And if this story has touched something deep in you, then maybe it's not just coincidence. Consider following this channel. Here, every story is more than a narrative. It's a compass, a whisper reminding you of what you already knew. But life's noise made you forget. And maybe all you need right now isn't another answer, but courage. Courage to stay, courage to trust, courage to keep going, even without seeing the whole path. Because in the end, virtue doesn't need a stage, it just needs room to grow, even if that room is a prison.